when farming stopped being about land. For most of human history, agriculture was not an industry. It was a relationship between people, land, weather, and time. Decisions were slow because reality was slow. Consequences were visible because feedback was immediate. If the soil was exhausted, yields dropped. If timing was wrong, crops failed. There was no abstraction layer between action and outcome. Farmers learned by watching, not dashboards, not reports, not projections. The land itself was the data source. That system was inefficient, unpredictable, and brutally honest. It punished mistakes quickly, but it also rewarded understanding. Knowledge accumulated across generations, embedded in routines that looked primitive but were deeply adaptive. Then agriculture began to modernize. At first, modernization solved real problems. Mechanization reduced labor intensity. Synthetic fertilizers corrected nutrient deficiencies. Pesticides stabilized yields. Irrigation expanded production into hostile climates. For a growing population, this was not optional progress. It was survival. But somewhere along the way, the logic of agriculture changed. The land stopped being the center of decision-making. Efficiency did. Once efficiency became the primary metric, agriculture started borrowing its mindset from manufacturing. Standardization replaced observation. Scale replaced intimacy. Variability became an enemy rather than a signal. Fields were no longer ecosystems. They were production units. This shift was subtle. Farmers did not wake up one day and decide to abandon stewardship. The system nudged them there. Larger equipment required larger fields. Larger fields demanded uniform crops. Uniform crops depended on uniform inputs. Uniform inputs required centralized suppliers. Each step made sense in isolation. Together, they rewired the entire system. Today, a modern farm operates inside layers of abstraction. Soil health is reduced to lab values. Weather becomes a probability curve. Crop performance turns into a yield forecast. Risk is outsourced to insurance models. Decisions are filtered through software, consultants, lenders, and suppliers before they ever touch the ground. The farmer is still present, but increasingly disconnected from direct cause and effect. This is where many conversations about modern agriculture stop, usually with a vague concern about sustainability, or a hopeful promise that more technology will fix the problems created by earlier technology. That framing misses the real issue. The problem is not that agriculture became technological. The problem is who the system now serves. Modern farming is no longer optimized primarily for soil resilience, long-term productivity, or farmer independence. It is optimized for throughput, predictability, and financial scalability. Those goals belong to supply chains, not ecosystems. When agriculture integrated fully into global markets, it inherited market logic. Markets reward consistency, volume, and speed. Nature does none of those things reliably. So nature had to be reshaped to comply. Crop diversity declined because monocultures are easier to manage at scale. Soil biology became collateral damage because chemical shortcuts deliver faster results. Livestock systems were compressed because density improves margins. None of this happened because farmers were careless. It happened because deviation from the model became economically dangerous. Once debt entered the equation at scale, experimentation became a liability. A farmer operating under heavy capital pressure cannot afford uncertainty. They cannot wait for soil regeneration to pay off in 10 years. They need predictable yields this season. That pressure quietly enforces conformity more effectively than regulation ever could. And this is the paradox of modern agriculture. We have more data than ever before, yet less understanding of the system as a whole. We measure everything except resilience. We optimize for yield while eroding the conditions that make yield possible. From the outside, farms look more advanced than ever. Satellites overhead, sensors in the soil, algorithms scheduling inputs to the square meter. From the inside, many farmers feel trapped. Trapped in contracts, trapped in input dependencies, trapped in financial cycles that leave no room to slow down. Technology did not free agriculture. It reorganized power within it. The question most people are asking is whether farming can become sustainable again. That is the wrong question. The real question is whether modern agriculture can function without permanent external control. Whether farmers can regain agency inside a system designed to minimize human judgment. Because once decision-making migrates fully from the field to the spreadsheet, farming stops being a profession rooted in land and becomes an execution role inside a much larger machine. And machines do not care about soil. They care about output. In the next part, we are going to look at who actually benefits from this system, and why many of the solutions being proposed today quietly reinforce the same structure that created the problem in the first place. The uncomfortable truth is this: modern agriculture is not failing because it lacks innovation. It is failing because it is succeeding at the wrong objective. Who the system actually works for. If modern agriculture feels efficient but oddly hollow, that is not an accident. Systems rarely drift by chance. They move toward whoever pays to shape them. To understand why farming looks the way it does today, you have to stop looking at farms and start looking at incentives. Agriculture did not become industrial because farmers demanded it. It became industrial because capital needed it to be. Once food production scaled beyond local markets, it entered a world governed by finance, logistics, and risk management. Those worlds hate uncertainty. Weather is uncertainty. Biology is uncertainty. Farmers, left to their own judgment, are uncertainty. So the system was redesigned to reduce all three. Input suppliers needed predictable demand. Lenders needed predictable repayment. Insurers needed predictable risk profiles. Processors needed predictable volume. Retailers needed predictable pricing. Notice what is missing from that list. Soil health, ecosystem stability, farmer autonomy. Those things are valuable, but they are not bankable. To make agriculture legible to financial systems, it had to be standardized. That standardization began with inputs. Seeds became proprietary. Fertilizers became formulas. Crop protection became schedules. What used to be adaptive decisions turned into product stacks. Once decisions could be packaged, they could be sold. This is where the power shift accelerated. A farmer no longer buys seed. They buy a system that assumes a specific fertilizer regime, a specific chemical program, a specific yield target, and a specific market outlet. Deviating from that system is technically possible, but economically punished. The farmer carries the risk. The system captures the margin. This is the part that rarely gets said out loud. Modern agriculture externalizes biological risk onto the producer while internalizing financial upside elsewhere. If weather destroys a crop, the farmer absorbs it. If soil degrades slowly, the farmer absorbs it. If input costs rise faster than commodity prices, the farmer absorbs it. But when yields are high and systems perform as designed, the profits are already distributed upstream and downstream. This is not conspiracy. It is structure. Corporations do not need to control farmers directly. They only need to control what is considered normal. Normal inputs, normal practices, normal yields, normal debt levels. Once those norms are established, deviation looks irresponsible. A farmer who wants to reduce inputs is labeled risky. A farmer who wants to diversify crops is labeled inefficient. A farmer who wants to slow down is labeled incompetitive. And in a market where margins are thin and capital is tight, labels matter. The system rewards compliance, not understanding. Technology plays a crucial role here, but not in the way it is marketed. Precision agriculture, farm management software, satellite analytics, and AI forecasting are presented as tools for empowerment. In practice, many of them function as tools of alignment. They align farmers with external expectations. Yield targets align with lender models. Input recommendations align with supplier portfolios. Risk assessments align with insurance frameworks. The farmer is told this is decision support. In reality, it is decision narrowing. Every recommendation comes preloaded with assumptions about what success looks like. Usually, success means hitting a number, not building resilience. Numbers are easy to audit. Resilience is not. This is why so many sustainability initiatives feel performative. They operate inside the same incentive structure. They optimize emissions per unit of output while ignoring absolute dependency. They celebrate efficiency gains while locking farmers deeper into systems they do not control. A farm can be sustainable on paper while being financially and biologically fragile in reality. Older farmers sense this instinctively. Many cannot articulate it in policy language, but they feel it in their bones. The constant pressure, the shrinking margins, the sense that no matter how hard they work, the rules keep changing. Younger farmers inherit a different problem. They enter a system already fully financialized. High land prices, high equipment costs, high input dependency. To participate, they must borrow heavily. To borrow, they must conform. Innovation, in this context, is not about new ideas. It is about new ways to survive inside the same cage. This is why so many solutions feel disconnected from lived reality. They assume farmers are free agents choosing inefficiency. They are not. They are operators inside a system optimized elsewhere. And here is the uncomfortable truth. The system does not need farms to be healthy. It needs them to be operational. As long as inputs are purchased, loans are serviced, and commodities flow, degradation can be tolerated. Slowly, quietly, distributed across time so it never triggers a single moment of accountability. This is why collapse, when it comes, is rarely dramatic at first. It shows up as exhaustion, burnout, exit, consolidation, fewer farmers managing more land with less margin for error. Every time a small or mid-sized operation disappears, the system tightens. Fewer nodes mean easier control. Larger operations mean fewer decision makers. The system becomes more legible, more manageable, and more brittle. That brittleness is masked by scale. When one large operation fails, it is called an anomaly. When many small ones fail, it is called progress. The tragedy is that the knowledge lost in this process cannot be replaced by software. Local adaptation, micro-decisions, intuition built over decades. Once gone, it does not come back. It is not stored in the cloud. So when people ask who modern agriculture works for, the answer is not corporations, in a simplistic sense. It works for systems that value predictability over resilience. Those systems are very good at expanding. They are terrible at surviving shock. In the next part, we are going to examine what happens when this kind of system encounters real stress. Climate volatility, input scarcity, energy constraints, financial tightening. Because systems optimized for efficiency do not fail gracefully. They fail suddenly, and when they do, the people closest to the land are the last ones protected. Efficiency is fragile by design. Systems that chase efficiency are admired right up until the moment they break. Then everyone acts surprised, as if this was unforeseeable, rather than structurally inevitable. Efficiency, by definition, removes slack. It strips away redundancy, buffers, and optionality. In manufacturing, that trade-off can be rational. If a factory line stops, you lose output, not an ecosystem. Agriculture is not a factory, no matter how much the spreadsheets wish it were. The modern agricultural system is built on the assumption of stable inputs, stable energy, stable climate patterns, and stable financial conditions. None of those assumptions are holding anymore. Climate volatility is the most obvious stressor, but it is not the most dangerous one. Weather has always been unpredictable. Farmers adapted to that reality when they had room to maneuver. The danger today is that adaptation has been priced out of the system. When margins are thin and debt is high, flexibility disappears. A farmer cannot easily switch crops mid-season. They cannot afford to experiment with lower input systems when loan terms demand yield certainty. They cannot pause production to rebuild soil biology when cash flow depends on continuous output. So when climate shocks arrive, the system absorbs them poorly. A late frost is no longer a bad year. It is a solvency risk. A drought is no longer a challenge. It is a cascading failure. The system compensates with insurance, subsidies, and emergency interventions. These mechanisms are framed as safety nets. In practice, they often function as stability illusions. They prevent immediate collapse while reinforcing the underlying structure that caused the vulnerability. This is where fragility hides. Every intervention that keeps an inefficiently resilient system running at scale increases its dependence on external support. The system becomes more efficient on paper and more brittle in reality. Energy is the second stressor, and it is more quietly destabilizing. Modern agriculture is energy-dense. Synthetic nitrogen is effectively fossil fuel in solid form. Long supply chains depend on cheap transport. Machinery assumes abundant diesel. Irrigation assumes reliable electricity. For decades, this energy abundance was treated as a constant. It is not. When energy prices rise, input costs rise faster than commodity prices. Farmers absorb the delta. The system does not slow down. It squeezes harder. Larger operators can negotiate or hedge. Smaller ones cannot. This accelerates consolidation, which looks efficient until it isn't. Large, centralized operations concentrate risk. They depend on just-in-time logistics, uniform management practices, and synchronized decision-making. When disruptions occur, they propagate faster and wider. In resilient systems, failures are small and frequent. In efficient systems, failures are rare and catastrophic. Financial stress completes the triangle. Agriculture has been financialized to the point where land is no longer just productive ground. It is an asset class. Its value is increasingly disconnected from what it can sustainably produce. This inflates entry barriers and locks existing operators into perpetual debt cycles. Debt is not neutral. It demands consistency. A farmer with high leverage cannot prioritize long-term resilience over short-term performance. The system punishes patience. It rewards throughput. Over time, this selects for operators willing to push systems harder and ignore slow degradation. This is not moral failure. It is selection pressure. When stress accumulates across climate, energy, and finance, systems do not adapt. They fracture. We are already seeing the early signals. More extreme yield variability, rising input dependency, increased government intervention just to maintain baseline production, quiet exits that never make headlines. What makes this phase dangerous is that the system still appears functional. Food is still produced, shelves are still stocked, data dashboards still look impressive. But stability is not the same as resilience. A resilient system bends and recovers. A fragile system holds its shape until it snaps. The agricultural system has optimized away its ability to bend. This is why conversations about feeding the world often feel disconnected from reality. They assume scale automatically implies security. History suggests the opposite. Highly centralized food systems fail faster, not slower, when stressed. The older generation of farmers understands this intuitively. Many grew up with more variability, fewer inputs, and more direct feedback. They remember when bad years were survived through diversity and community, not insurance paperwork. The newer system replaces those buffers with financial instruments and technological proxies. They work until correlations increase. And correlations always increase under stress. When drought affects multiple regions simultaneously, insurance models break. When energy prices spike globally, input subsidies lag. When climate patterns shift structurally, historical data becomes a liability. At that point, optimization becomes inertia. The most dangerous moment in any system is when decision-makers believe efficiency equals control. Control invites complacency. Complacency delays adaptation. The agricultural system is approaching that moment. The real question is not whether stress will increase. It already has. The question is who bears the cost when the system finally fails to absorb it. Because systems designed for efficiency protect capital first, not caretakers. In the next part, we will look at the role technology plays at this stage. Not as a savior, but as a stabilizer that often deepens dependence while claiming to reduce risk. Technology does not remove fragility. It often hides it. Technology did not arrive to save farming. Technology rarely enters a system to question its assumptions. It enters to make existing assumptions scale. In agriculture, this distinction matters more than most people realize. Precision tools, data platforms, automation, and now artificial intelligence are marketed as corrections to the excesses of industrial farming. Less waste, more accuracy, smarter decisions. The pitch is always the same. Technology will make the system gentler without changing its shape. That promise is comforting. It is also misleading. Most agricultural technology is not designed to restore farmer judgment. It is designed to formalize it, standardize it, and make it transferable. Once judgment can be codified, it can be audited. Once it can be audited, it can be managed. Once it can be managed, it can be owned. This is the quiet function of digital agriculture. When a sensor tells a farmer when to irrigate, the farmer is no longer responding directly to the field. They are responding to an interpretation of the field. That interpretation is based on thresholds, models, and assumptions chosen elsewhere. Those assumptions matter. Most systems are optimized around yield stability and input efficiency, not ecological regeneration. They assume linear responses in systems that are deeply nonlinear. They assume the future will resemble the past closely enough to justify predictive control. That assumption is becoming increasingly fragile. Data does not create understanding on its own. It amplifies whatever framework it is built inside. If the framework prioritizes throughput, technology will accelerate throughput. If the framework ignores long-term soil dynamics, technology will optimize their erosion more precisely. This is why so much innovation feels impressive but hollow. Technology adds resolution, not wisdom. Automation deepens this dynamic. As machinery becomes more autonomous, decision loops lengthen. The person closest to the land has fewer opportunities to intervene. Deviations are flagged as anomalies rather than signals. Systems are tuned to correct variance, not listen to it. In older farming systems, variability was information. In modern systems, variability is noise. The irony is that the more complex the system becomes, the more it relies on simplifications to function. Models require boundaries. Algorithms require training data. Training data requires historical stability. When conditions shift outside those bounds, the system does not adapt gracefully. It either overcorrects or freezes. This is not a software bug. It is a design trade-off. Technology also reshapes power by reshaping dependence. A farmer who relies on proprietary software relies on ongoing access. A farmer who relies on cloud analytics relies on connectivity. A farmer who relies on algorithmic recommendations relies on update cycles and licensing terms. Individually, these dependencies seem minor. Collectively, they move control away from the field. Ownership becomes conditional. Autonomy becomes subscription-based. This is where the language around smart farming becomes revealing. Smart for whom? Smart according to which objectives? Smart under which constraints? A system can be extremely smart at maximizing output while being profoundly stupid about long-term survivability. Older farmers tend to be skeptical of this not because they are anti-technology, but because they have seen cycles. They know tools are neutral only in theory. In practice, tools embed priorities. A plow reshaped soil differently than a disc. A hybrid seed reshaped rotations. A spreadsheet reshaped decision timing. Digital tools are no different. They just operate at a distance that makes their influence harder to see. The most consequential effect of technology is not efficiency. It is normalization. Once a digital system defines what a good field looks like, deviation becomes suspect. Once dashboards define success, alternative outcomes are devalued. Once benchmarks are established, exploration becomes deviation. This narrows the solution space exactly when expansion is needed. Technology excels at scaling known solutions. It struggles with unknown unknowns. Agriculture is increasingly dominated by unknown unknowns. Climate instability introduces conditions with no historical precedent. Soil systems respond over decades, not quarters. Social pressures shift faster than biological ones. In that environment, excessive reliance on predictive tools can delay adaptation. By the time models adjust, reality has already moved on. The deeper problem is that technology often creates the illusion of control. Control reduces perceived risk. Reduced perceived risk encourages tighter optimization. Tighter optimization increases fragility. This feedback loop is subtle and dangerous. None of this means technology has no place in agriculture. It means technology must be subordinated to systems that value resilience over precision. That is not how most tools are currently deployed. Technology is being used to stabilize a system that is structurally misaligned with the realities it depends on. Stabilization is not transformation, it is postponement, and postponement has costs. In the next part, we will examine what happens to farmers themselves inside this environment. Not as operators, but as people. How decision fatigue, loss of agency, and systemic pressure reshape who stays in agriculture and who leaves. Because no system survives the quiet removal of its most capable participants. The quiet exit of the farmer. Most agricultural collapse does not look like collapse. It looks like retirement, sale, consolidation, a neighbor quietly disappearing from the map. The system rarely fails with drama. It fails through attrition. For decades, policymakers, technologists, and investors have focused on keeping farms productive. Far less attention has been paid to keeping farmers present. The distinction matters. Modern agriculture demands more cognitive labor than ever before. Regulatory compliance, financial management, technology oversight, supply coordination. Farming has become a hybrid role: operator, accountant, data analyst, logistics manager, and risk officer. The work expanded, the margins did not. This creates a specific kind of pressure. Not acute, but chronic. Not catastrophic, but exhausting. Decision fatigue sets in when every choice carries financial consequence and little autonomy. Older farmers feel this as erosion of identity. Skills that once defined competence are devalued. Intuition gives way to protocol. Experience is overridden by recommendation engines. Younger farmers experience it as precarity. High debt, high fixed costs, low room for error. Entry into farming now requires accepting systemic constraints from day one. There is no phase of learning through failure. Failure is unaffordable. Both groups respond the same way over time. They leave. Some sell early while asset values are high. Some hold on until a bad year makes the decision for them. Some stay but disengage mentally, operating on autopilot, minimizing risk rather than building possibility. None of this is irrational. It is adaptive behavior inside a system that punishes deviation and rewards endurance, not creativity. The loss here is not just numbers. It is capacity. Experienced farmers carry context that no model captures. They understand microclimates, soil quirks, local pest cycles, social dynamics. This knowledge is embedded in practice, not documentation. When they exit, it evaporates. Consolidation does not replace this knowledge. It dilutes it. Large operations rely on standardized practices because they must. Scale demands uniformity. Uniformity reduces sensitivity. Reduced sensitivity increases reliance on external inputs and oversight. The system compensates by hiring consultants, deploying technology, and layering management. This increases overhead and further distances decision-makers from the field. It is a feedback loop that selects against attentiveness. The cultural cost is harder to measure but equally significant. Farming historically carried meaning beyond production. Stewardship, continuity, place-based identity. These values are difficult to maintain when land becomes a line item and decisions are made to satisfy quarterly obligations. When farming loses its narrative, it loses its advocates. Public understanding of agriculture becomes abstract. Food appears as product, not process. This disconnect makes it easier to impose policies and systems that look efficient but ignore lived realities. Farmers become implementers of strategies designed elsewhere. When those strategies fail, blame flows downward. This breeds quiet resentment and eventual withdrawal. The most telling signal is succession. Fewer farmers want their children to take over. Not because the work is hard, but because the trade-offs feel unjustifiable. Long hours, high stress, low control, public scrutiny. A system that cannot reproduce its caretakers is not sustainable, no matter how high its yields. This is where many reform efforts fall short. They focus on tools, not agency. On metrics, not meaning. On optimization, not ownership. Farmers do not need more dashboards. They need room to decide. When that room disappears, the best leave first. Those who remain are either trapped or aligned with the system's demands. Diversity of practice narrows. Vulnerability increases. The tragedy is that this erosion is framed as efficiency. Fewer farmers, larger operations, higher output. On paper, success. In reality, hollowing. In the next part, we will look at the proposed solutions gaining traction now. Regenerative branding, climate-smart agriculture, digital optimization. We will examine what they actually change, and what they leave untouched. Because reform that leaves power structures intact is not reform. It is rebranding. When solutions protect the system, not the land. Every time a system begins to show stress, it generates solutions that promise correction without disruption. Agriculture is deep in that phase. The language has shifted. Regenerative, climate-smart, net zero, outcome-based. These terms sound transformative. They imply a fundamental rethink of how farming relates to land, climate, and society. Most of the time, they are not. Many of today's solutions are designed to preserve existing power structures while adjusting surface metrics. They aim to make the system look sustainable without changing who controls it or how decisions are made. This is not accidental. True transformation threatens incumbents. Take regenerative agriculture as it is commonly deployed at scale. In its original form, it emphasized observation, adaptation, and place-based practice. It was inherently decentralized. That made it powerful. It also made it difficult to commodify. So it was reframed. Regeneration became a set of practices. Practices became protocols. Protocols became certifications. Certifications became market signals. Once regeneration could be verified, it could be traded. The focus shifted from rebuilding ecosystems to producing documentation. This does not mean regenerative practices are ineffective. Many work. The problem is that they are often implemented inside the same incentive framework that caused degradation in the first place. Farmers are paid to comply with checklists, not to think. Outcomes are measured over short windows, not ecological timescales. Risk remains with the producer. Value accrues to those who aggregate and brand the results. Climate-smart agriculture follows a similar pattern. Emissions are reduced per unit of output, while total system dependence remains unchanged. Efficiency improves. Fragility remains. Carbon markets push this logic further. Soil carbon becomes a financial instrument. Measurement uncertainty becomes a legal issue. Long-term stewardship becomes a contract obligation. Farmers are asked to guarantee outcomes in systems they do not fully control. Again, risk flows downward. These mechanisms reward those who can navigate paperwork, finance, and compliance. They disadvantage small and mid-sized operations, diversified systems, and farmers operating outside standardized frameworks. The system claims inclusivity while selecting for conformity. Technology reinforces this pattern by making compliance scalable. Digital reporting, remote sensing, automated verification. These tools lower transaction costs for corporations while increasing surveillance of producers. Participation becomes conditional. Exit becomes costly. The most dangerous aspect of these solutions is that they absorb criticism. They give the appearance of progress. They create new revenue streams. They reduce pressure for deeper structural change. This is stabilization, not transformation. True resilience would require redistributing decision-making power. It would require slowing down. It would require accepting variability. It would require margins that allow experimentation and failure. Those requirements conflict with financial optimization. So the system chooses reform that does not threaten itself. Older farmers recognize this pattern because they have lived through previous waves. Conservation programs that paid for practices, not outcomes. Subsidies that encouraged production without resilience. Innovations that promised independence but delivered dependency. The names change, the structure remains. The danger is that each wave of partial reform reduces urgency. Each one delays reckoning. Meanwhile, underlying degradation continues. Soil loss does not pause for certification cycles. Climate volatility does not respect reporting frameworks. Social trust does not recover through branding. At some point, the gap between narrative and reality becomes too large to sustain. In the next part, we will examine what genuine resilience would actually look like. Not as an ideal, but as a system design problem. What would need to change? Who would resist? What trade-offs would be unavoidable? Because resilience is not free. It costs efficiency, speed, and short-term predictability. And that is why it is resisted. What happens when systems ignore their limits? History is inconvenient for systems that believe they are unprecedented. Agriculture has gone through efficiency-driven expansions before. Each time, the logic was similar. Increase output, standardize practice, centralize control, push limits. Each time, the system appeared stable right up until it wasn't. The collapses did not happen because people were ignorant. They happened because incentives made warning signs easy to ignore. Soil exhaustion is the oldest example. Civilizations from Mesopotamia to Rome expanded agricultural output by intensifying land use. Irrigation without drainage, continuous monocropping, nutrient extraction without replenishment. For decades, sometimes centuries, yields increased. Then salinity rose, structure collapsed, productivity fell. The response was usually expansion into new land, not regeneration of old land. That bought time, not resilience. Modern agriculture behaves the same way, just with better tools. Instead of new land, it expands through inputs. Instead of ecological buffers, it uses financial ones. Instead of migration, it uses consolidation. The pattern remains. What makes the current moment different is scale and synchronization. Historically, agricultural failures were regional. Today's system is globally coupled. Supply chains span continents. Genetics are shared across hemispheres. Inputs are concentrated among a handful of suppliers. When shocks occur, they no longer remain local. Climate volatility is synchronizing stress. Droughts, floods, and heat waves now affect multiple major production regions simultaneously. This breaks the assumption that shortfalls in one area will be offset elsewhere. Energy volatility synchronizes cost pressure. Fertilizer, transport, and mechanization all respond to the same underlying inputs. When prices move, they move together. Financial tightening synchronizes constraint. Credit conditions shift globally. Risk tolerance drops everywhere at once. Marginal operators lose access simultaneously. This is how systems fail at scale. Not through one catastrophic event, but through cascading stress that overwhelms buffers designed for isolated incidents. The warning signs are already visible. Input use is increasing faster than yields in many regions. Yield variability is rising even where averages hold. Farmers are carrying more debt per unit of output. Governments are intervening more frequently just to maintain baseline production. These are not signals of health. They are signals of compensation. A resilient system requires fewer emergency measures over time. A fragile system requires more. The most dangerous phase is the one we are in now. The system still works well enough to justify itself. Failures are framed as anomalies. Interventions are framed as proof of robustness. This delays structural change. Collapse, when it comes, is rarely sudden at the macro level. It unfolds unevenly. Certain crops become unviable. Certain regions hollow out. Certain producers exit en masse. Food remains available, but less diverse. Prices remain stable until they don't. Trust erodes quietly. At that point, responses become reactive. Policies prioritize continuity over correction. Production is protected even as foundations weaken further. This is where societies discover too late that efficiency masked dependency. The lesson from history is not that agriculture must return to the past. It is that systems that deny biological limits eventually encounter them without negotiation. Engineering can delay consequences, finance can redistribute them, technology can obscure them, none can remove them. The question facing modern agriculture is not whether limits exist. It is whether they will be acknowledged deliberately or enforced brutally. In the next part, we will look forward, not with optimism, but with realism. What paths are actually plausible from here? Not ideal futures, but likely ones. Because the future of farming will not be decided by slogans. It will be decided by which constraints are faced honestly. The futures that are actually likely. Most conversations about the future of agriculture collapse into two fantasies. One imagines total technological salvation. The other imagines a return to some idealized past. Neither is plausible. Systems do not reverse cleanly. They mutate. The future of farming will not be chosen. It will emerge from constraint. Energy, climate, finance, and politics will narrow the range of options until certain paths become unavoidable. The first likely future is managed contraction. In this scenario, overall agricultural output stabilizes or declines slightly in real terms, while efficiency continues to improve on paper. Marginal land exits production. Input use becomes more targeted but more expensive. Governments intervene selectively to maintain strategic crops. Farms get fewer, larger, and more tightly integrated with supply chains. Farmer autonomy continues to shrink, but collapse is avoided through continuous management. This future is stable but brittle. It depends on constant oversight and political willingness to subsidize continuity. It is the path of least resistance. The second likely future is fragmented adaptation. Here, global systems weaken unevenly. Certain regions invest in localized resilience. Others double down on industrial scale. Food systems become less uniform. Regional diets diverge. Supply chains shorten where they must. This future is messier but more robust. It sacrifices some efficiency for adaptability. It favors farmers with strong local knowledge and flexible operations. It also creates inequality between regions. Not everyone adapts at the same speed or with the same resources. The third likely future is forced simplification. In this scenario, energy constraints, climate shocks, or financial crises overwhelm stabilization mechanisms. Input availability becomes inconsistent. High-complexity systems fail first. Farming simplifies not by choice but by necessity. Fewer inputs, fewer crops, lower yields, higher labor intensity. This future is survivable but disruptive. It punishes over-optimization and rewards basic competence. It arrives suddenly after long denial. The fourth future, least discussed but increasingly visible, is dual agriculture. A highly capitalized, technology-heavy system produces bulk commodities for global markets. Alongside it, smaller, regionally adapted systems produce food for local consumption. These systems coexist but do not integrate. They follow different rules, metrics, and values. One is optimized, the other is resilient. This future already exists in fragments. Which of these futures dominates will depend less on innovation and more on honesty. Honesty about limits, about trade-offs, about who bears risk and who captures value. What will not happen is a painless transition. Resilience costs something. It costs speed. It costs margins. It costs certainty. Societies that refuse to pay those costs upfront will pay higher ones later. The role of farmers in these futures diverges sharply. In managed contraction, farmers become system operators. In fragmented adaptation, they become local strategists. In forced simplification, they become survivalists. In dual systems, they choose sides. None of these futures restores the romantic image of farming. All demand realism. The uncomfortable truth is that agriculture will likely become less invisible. Food will carry more context. Variability will be harder to hide. Choices will be clearer. That clarity will challenge consumers as much as producers. The final question is not whether agriculture can change. It already is. The question is whether societies are willing to accept agriculture as a living system with limits, rather than a machine that occasionally needs recalibration. In the final part, we will close the loop. Not with solutions, but with responsibility. Who can act? Where leverage actually exists? And what paying attention now might prevent later? Because indifference is also a choice. And it has consequences. Responsibility, not solutions. At this point, most systems want reassurance. A plan, a roadmap, something that implies control is still fully available. Agriculture does not offer that luxury. What it offers instead is responsibility. distributed, uncomfortable, and impossible to outsource completely. Responsibility begins with recognizing where leverage actually exists. It does not sit primarily with individual farmers. They operate under constraints they did not design. Asking them to do better inside a misaligned system is moral theater. It does not sit entirely with technology. Tools amplify intent, they do not create it. Without structural change, technology accelerates existing trajectories. It does not sit cleanly with consumers either. Individual choice matters, but it cannot rebalance systems built at industrial scale. Responsibility sits with institutions that shape incentives. Finance, policy, procurement, land ownership structures, contract design. These determine what is possible long before a seed touches soil. Responsibility also sits with culture. What societies choose to value determines what systems they tolerate. Cheap food at any cost produces one kind of agriculture. Food that reflects ecological reality produces another. Neither is free. The hardest shift required is psychological. Modern societies are accustomed to abstraction. Food appears without context. Risk is hidden. Consequences are delayed. Agriculture has absorbed this abstraction more than most sectors. Reversing that trend does not mean romanticizing farming. It means reintroducing visibility, variability, accountability. It means accepting that resilience looks inefficient in the short term and indispensable in the long term. It means understanding that stability maintained through constant intervention is not strength. It is dependence. Older generations often understand this instinctively. They lived closer to limits. Younger generations are being forced to relearn it under less forgiving conditions. The opportunity, if it exists, lies in attention. Attention to soil as a system, not a substrate. Attention to farmers as decision-makers, not executors. Attention to trade-offs instead of slogans. Systems rarely collapse because no one saw the problem. They collapse because seeing it carried no incentive to act. Agriculture is still early enough in this cycle that action could reduce severity, even if it cannot avoid disruption entirely. That action will not look dramatic. It will look boring. Policy adjustments, contract changes, risk redistribution, support for diversity rather than scale alone. None of this fits neatly into innovation narratives. That is why it is ignored. The future of farming will not be saved by a breakthrough. It will be shaped by thousands of quiet decisions about what is allowed, rewarded, and ignored. If there is a single lesson worth carrying forward, it is this. Systems that treat living foundations as expendable eventually discover they were not. Agriculture is not just a sector. It is a dependency. When it weakens, everything built on top of it inherits that weakness. Paying attention now does not guarantee comfort later. Ignoring it guarantees cost. If this kind of long-form analysis helps you think more clearly about where food systems are heading, subscribing is the simplest way to support it. No trends, no noise, just land, systems, and consequences.